So let us start. I hope that you are in a good mood after the lunch. And finally we have the screen working, so let us, on this positive note, start the second panel discussion dedicated to the sports infrastructure and human resources, because this is something that we need in order to implement sports projects, namely the financing, infrastructure and human resources. And we will be talking about how to sustainably develop these resources so that they contribute to the development of grassroots sports. So now I will invite let us start with Mr. Sesks, Mayor of Liepāja City, Zane Grundiņa Arāja, member of the board of the Electrum Olympic Center, Māris Liepiņš, CEO of the Latvian Sports Federation Council, Ainārs Mežulis, member of the Latvian Parliament Sports Subcommittee, Edgars Severs, Deputy State Secretary of the Education and Science Ministry from the Sports Department, and Dina Sports, Dina Vīksna from the Riga City Council Sports Department. And let us start with Mr. Sesks, Mayor of Liepāja City. So, with reference to my initial address, let me continue about the infrastructure. And this will apply not only to Liepāja City, but probably across Latvia. And here I should mention the bicycle tracks that we have made between seaside and city center. And this was done already several years ago. And it was done with a view to promote the use of bicycles instead of cars for local commuting. And now we can see that in the mornings and also evenings, we can see flows of cyclists, and which means that people are using bicycles to get to and from work. And we can see families commuting around the city. And this was quite inspiring, and we extended the original track, which was around 10 kilometers, and now we have extended it substantially. And now we are talking about dozens of kilometers, which is around 70 to 80 kilometers nowadays. So this is one of the types of grassroots sports infrastructure that we offer to our citizens. Of course, we've made also several mistakes while developing these cycling tracks, because sometimes they, in a way, stand in the way of pedestrians. But of course, with each next section of these cycling tracks, we try to separate the flows of pedestrians from cyclists. Another area that we started a couple of years ago is the free access open air activity facilities. We installed basketball hoops, different exercise machines, which are freely accessible from the general public. And actually we can see that people appreciate what we have done. And you remember that in the Soviet times we had these different basketball courts, which gradually turned into parking lots, unfortunately. But nowadays we are trying to reverse the process and actually take the land which is used for car parks and turn them into sports activities grounds. And also what concerns track and field disciplines, unfortunately, so far they had very little opportunities to train during the winter time, because mostly we had open-air facilities. But now we have launched already procurement for building sports arena for track and field, which will be built within a direct vicinity of a secondary school, so that children are able to use these facilities during the day, and in the evening this infrastructure will be used by professional athletes and otherwise. And thus we are trying to, in a way, make the most out of this infrastructure, because the demand is quite high, and we have to manage and in a way ensure that all those interested have an opportunity to use this arena. And I'm really happy that our people actively use these facilities, and I truly hope that apart from Liepāja, also other, at least larger cities will invest more and more in order to create extensive opportunities for their citizens to engage in various sports activities, not only in summertime, but also throughout winter, which currently is a problem here in Latvia, because of course footballers need a place for training also during winter time. Sometimes they are even forced to train on the beach, which of course also is quite interesting and from the diversity or unique experience point of view. But generally speaking, I think that football infrastructure has to be further developed across Latvia. And also outside the city center, we have raised several complexes used for summer camps, and where school children are able to engage in various activities, and most of them are located on the seaside. And of course there are certain restrictions regarding building or construction activities in the dune zone, but farther away it is allowed, and we are happy to implement such projects. Currently we are also developing a design for tennis courts, which will also suit the needs of those who would like to play tennis also during winter time. We all know Sevastova, who has great achievements at the world level in tennis. So we have to develop new talent, and we are working on it. So that would be also my overview, and since Mr. Sasks will be leaving soon, please use this opportunity to ask him a question, because he will have to leave quite soon. So if not, then thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. And now I will give floor to Edgars Severs, Deputy State Secretary of the Education and Science Ministry, Head of the Sports Department. Hello once again. Since we are talking about sports infrastructure and resources, and by this I mean both financial resources and human resources, and let me start with probably a couple of best practices, because in each country sports is financed from various sources. But let me give you an overview about the situation in Latvia, how resources are attracted or generated, and sometimes through economic activities, which of course is not the basic activity of sports organizations, but sometimes they are forced to do so. Then of course we also receive funds from international organizations, and this is an important support that we receive at national level, and which is instrumental for further development, especially in some specific disciplines. Of course, also the ministry is in charge of distributing funds, state budget funds, and the parliament decides on how they are distributed. Then, of course, another source is donations from various state-owned companies, and companies that work with profit. They tend to engage in sponsorship of cultural and sports activities. And of course, whenever we are talking about taxpayers' money, appropriate supervisory mechanisms are put in place. Then we also have sponsors, namely private companies that use the sports sector as a platform for advertising or promoting their companies. But of course, local market is relatively small, and of course, we are not overly attractive from the sponsor's point of view. Nevertheless, there is certain activity. We truly hope for an increase. And then, of course, there is also this indirect source of funding, namely volunteer donations or general public donations through various campaigns. And at various levels, at national and municipal and organizational level, of course, we always have to find the balance between what we want and what we actually can afford. Because, of course, we have very many needs. We require a lot of resources, and but practically always the situation is that we cannot afford to do all at once. And of course, whenever the state budget is adopted, we submit all the requests from all areas of sport. But generally speaking, a lot has been invested from the state budget into sports infrastructure. But of course, this does not always cover the human resources, and here I'm talking about sports organizations. Because so far, as I already mentioned, a great emphasis has been put on infrastructure instead of human resources. Also, for the budget of the next year, we have actually revisited the priorities in order to strike a more healthier balance between infrastructure and human resources. But this, of course, requires to set specific goals and to agree on priorities. And we have developed also political guidelines for 2020. We have been discussing them with various organizations, where we try to agree on main priorities and main principles. But of course, we invest a lot of efforts in order to ensure that these guidelines not only live just on paper, but also are translated into specific practical outcomes. And of course, all of these processes require good governance and transparency, especially since we are talking about municipal and central government funds. And also in case of sponsorship, of course, the sources of funds insist on transparency so that they know that the money that they have invested is actually used for the purposes for which it has been allocated. So much has been done to publish all the information about the distribution of public funds and also funds received from other sources, and also minutes of various meetings are being published on the websites of relevant institutions, and also in case of the Football Federation, which, based on a survey of UEFA, was actually deemed to be quite among the best countries in terms of transparency and access of information. And of course, in order for these processes to be implemented efficiently, we also have to have appropriate control mechanisms and appropriate supervision, which goes hand in hand with the transparency and provision of information to the public. And whenever we have some problems, this information is disseminated publicly and discussed appropriately. What concerns human resources, whenever we talk about managers and coaches, but we should not forget also other important players in the sports sector, especially those who are not engaged full-time on a regular basis. And in Latvia, just like in many other European countries, where the demographic situation is far from excessively favorable, there are many cases where we have to actually balance the medical aspects of trying to involve children in sports as early as possible, since different disciplines are actually competing to attract young children. The same applies to coaches. Basically, many of them work on the principle of voluntary work. Of course, we have a network of sports schools where full-time coaches are employed. But when we talk about good governance and fair competition, we want the whole system to be demand-driven, or actually right balance, the push and pull factors, so that people choose the best coaches, the best sports activity services providers, etc. And whenever we talk about sports infrastructure, then one of the key words is actual accessibility and availability. And not only we have to ensure physical accessibility to this infrastructure, but also keep in mind the actual demand. And based on this approach, we've actually worked on implementing various infrastructure projects in the recent years. So we try to cover those disciplines that enjoy most demand among the people. And currently, at the national level, also in order to ensure fair game and fair competition, we have developed a strategy for building a new sports infrastructure. We are drafting a list of priorities or types of sports that will be supported from the state budget. And this list and priorities basically relies on the general demand on the part of general population, because of course we have had some mistakes where infrastructure is built, but actually there is no one to make full use of this infrastructure. And another aspect of accessibility is not just physical, for them to be physically accessible, but also affordable. And of course, subsidizing of the use of infrastructure would be quite important. Otherwise, we are excluding groups of people for whom it's quite difficult to cover the costs. And therefore, we have included this item also in our recommendations. And we can also mention Liepāja city as a role model where actually infrastructure is very actively used, which means that it matches the actual demand in this local society. So, as it was emphasized many times before, of course, good governance is the key word. This is something that cannot be achieved overnight. This is something that is developed in a long term. And I would say that since regaining of our independence during the last 25 years, we have achieved already quite good results. And we are looking forward to doing even better in future and ensuring good governance at all levels of grassroots sports.
Thank
Thank you, Mr. Severs, and now I would like to give the floor to COB of the Electron Sports Arena. Hello, dear ladies and gentlemen. I'm very happy to be in Liepāja today, and as Mr. Sasks already mentioned, you shouldn't think that Riga is the only place or the right place. You know, we can only envy regional sports centers, Liepāja, Ventspils, Valmiera, Jelgava, and others, because municipalities are very passionate about, or very dedicated, in fact, to developing this crucial infrastructure in the regions, thus promoting active lifestyle. And in Riga, for 10 years, we've been managing 24,000 square meter building, the Olympic Center of Riga, and the building is, the arena is as big as it is. We can't, expand it. But that said, let me present to you how sports promotion or grassroots sports promotion takes place in practice and what we do as the Olympic Center. And I would also like to respond to Mr. Zalit's comment, when were you, or the question, when were you doing sports last? I just recently was actually exercising. That's why I have sore throat, and I was not dressed appropriately when I got engaged in my sporting activities. That's why I'm a bit ill today. Nevertheless, I'll try to present to you our case. And we've been operating the Olympic Center in Riga for 8 years since its opening, and our main duty is to manage the building. So as regards to what lures the people into our Olympic Center, well, it's the sort of the atmosphere, the environment. You can, of course, run outdoors, you can jog outdoors, you can play football on sand. You can do anything if you have the right motivation. However, your motivation grows if you do it together with others. If you have people, like-minded people around you, and if you would go through our Olympic Center at 6 at night when we have the peak sort of load, it's very difficult to squeeze yourself through the crowd because there are a lot of people going to the Olympic Center. 1,700 people a day go through the Olympic Center building, so that is a great, load, not only on the building but also on our staff. So we have gymnastics hall, we have basketball court and swimming pool and so on and so forth. And although we are not responsible for promoting grassroots sport, we do that as well because we see it as a very promising endeavor, because that might bring us more clients, and we want to show our corporate social responsibility that way. We were opened 8 years ago. We belong to the Latvian Olympics Committee, and we our arena where you can get engaged in 27 different sports, swimming, physical exercising. There is also the gym where you can lift weights. So we have all subcontractors, and our subcontractors are federations. Quite many of you, by the way, here are most probably our clients, our tenants, so to say. Now, as regards to our specialization, we have 12 professional clubs that are sort of registered with us, and there are different amateurs clubs as well, and so on and so forth. You can see the statistics here. So 1.3 million clients a year, basically, 3,700 each day. So basically those are the visitors, sort of the unique visitors that go through the Olympic Center. So the more active people are becoming, the harder it is for us to cater to their needs. Mr. Sir said that we have good infrastructure. In terms of infrastructure, we are fine, but I would not agree really with his statement. We have 85 to 90% sort of occupancy rate, and the demand is 85 to 90%. We can't satisfy or take all the people during the peak season, and there are only 2-3 such centers in Riga, which means that there is great demand for the infrastructure. People are very much willing to get engaged not only in grassroots sports but also in other sort of traditional sports disciplines. And here you can see our distribution of load, so to say. So we have football pitch and different halls, and of course seasonality is a factor as well. In summer mostly people don't come to the Olympic Center, but 75% of load is okay for us to maintain the infrastructure. If it's higher, then we have to spend more money to maintain the infrastructure, and that of course poses risk to reputation and to the quality, because the more people use equipment, the quicker it dilapidates and wears out, and people no longer use, old equipment, that they don't like it, and then the demand goes down. So we are quite successful in maintaining the quality standards, but the more people engage in sports, the more difficult it is for us to cater really to everyone's needs. And here you can see the turnover. We opened just in 2006, right after the NATO summit, NATO Riga summit. It went up despite the crisis. You see the revenue going up and the turnover going up despite crisis. Now, the growth in terms of turnover and revenue is a sort of indicative of the good governance standards and quality standards that we stick by. I joined the management at the end of 2007, became a member of the Olympic Committee, and for the past 10 years we have had to be had to be very flexible. We had to respond to changing demand patterns in the market, because we are primarily or directly dependent on the clients. Well, contrary to other Olympic centers, we don't get any direct funding from the state or municipality. This is probably the first year that we have received any funding from municipality or the state. Otherwise, we were sort of sustainable, and we had to find the funding ourselves for all our needs. And here are some of the conclusions from the Olympic Centre, the house where the sports lives. This reflects the sort of the popular sentiments or the people's mindset. It is, trendy to be active and get engaged in sports. You saw what the turnout was at the marathon, at various cycling marathons, and so on and so forth. People are very actively getting engaged in sporting activities, and various surveys have been conducted on what effect the sports or physical activity has on the body, on the human body, how this physical exercising can relieve the pressure of the everyday living, helps you get stress-free and so on and so forth. And I've seen it in my kids, children and teens, they choose to get engaged in sports. Of course, teachers will tell you otherwise, because there are different excuses being used for the children not engaging in the gym lessons, but they use a lot of time on the training grounds, an hour before the practice and 2 hours after the practice. And quite often you hear the people saying, can you go to your child in the floorball hall, and can you tell him that he has to go home because he's forgotten his phone and his practice is over, but he's still there doing some kind of practicing and so on and so forth. But we're very happy about them spending more time in the training environment, so to say. Then another important group of society is students. We need to target them specifically and encourage them to get active as well and come to the Olympic centers, because after their studies they become parents, they have children afterwards, and they have to bring their children to different youth academies, and if they've been in a youth academy they usually return or come back with their children afterwards when they have children. So basically by getting them engaged in the youth academy, they'll return with sort of the next generation along with them. And one of the preconditions, of course, is quality equipment and good assistants or coaches. So human resources are of a vital importance. Quite often I hear, people asking me, the coach who told me to do this, he told me the wrong thing, now my health has gotten worse. I mean, you need to find a professional coach and the right environment with the right infrastructure and the equipment to do it properly, or otherwise you'll find yourself in great health problems. And, sports is not limited age-wise. Our oldest client is 85 years old, and we offer an opportunity to swim from the very young age, and this 85-year-old man is swimming since the opening of our pool, and we always greet him, say hello. He's like our regular customer, and he says, I'll continue coming to the pool until I die, and we tell him, no, please don't do that, don't die in our pool. But of course, he comes with his sandwiches, and he's got tea as well, and sometimes he falls if the snow has not been cleaned, and his daughter, writes a complaint. So infrastructure is a very, very welcome thing, and you've been talking about infrastructure at great extent here, but but when we come, to the training ground, and when we go inside, when we see the infrastructure, we always conclude that the infrastructure is not the most important thing. You need to have the passion. If you have the passion, if you have the motivation, you can, do it anywhere, in any sort of conditions, and it's again contagious. I mean, it spreads from one person to another, and grassroots sports is really like a disease, that spreads from one to another people. So thank you. It was a great pleasure to present our Olympic Centre to you. Looking forward to have you as clients. Thank you. Thank you. And now I'd like to turn the floor to Dina Viksne. Hello, dear ladies and gentlemen. Let me tell you this. I'll try to be very concise and get through my presentation in a couple of minutes, just to leave enough time for a short video advertising our newest project that we developed together with an organization for sporting society is its name, but that will come later. Respecting our foreign colleagues, I have a presentation in English, but I'll talk in Latvian. Well, considering the functions that have been delegated or assigned to us based on the law on municipalities, Riga City Council is responsible for promoting youth and youth sports, children's and youth sports, grassroots sports, and we are responsible for providing sporting opportunities and motivating everyone to get active. So these priorities that stem from the law determine the way we plan our budget and the way we plan our human resources, or influences the way we do it. And now what concerns sports education, which is the very basis for the grassroots promotion and grassroots sports. Now, let me give you some of the figures about engagement levels and what sort of sports are the most popular. And I'm talking about education and vocational education in particular that is provided by the municipal schools, the sports education, I mean. Well, there are informal education programs. So there are roughly 25,500 kids attending various informal education programs. 9,200 and something go to the youth school, and 447 go to other, informal education courses. So out of 667,000 youngsters that we have, school-age children, almost a third of them are engaged in different sports education programs, and we've been happy to make sure that the sports managers in schools still are being paid, that we've have those positions. Those are sports managers inside the schools who are taking care of the sporting events at the school level and also provide transportation of school kids to various sporting events. Now, as regards to the disciplines that are the most popular, of course, team sports, the most popular, basketball, swimming, track and fields, and various fight sports, various martial arts. What concerns education, there's municipal education, private education, as well. The infrastructure is owned by municipality and state and private as well. Olympic Sports Centre is the biggest piece of infrastructure. We're very proud of it, and we try to promote it wherever possible. Now, what concerns municipally owned sports infrastructure, 8 stadiums, regional sports centres. 2 are being built at the moment, are in the construction phase. They will later become the regional sports centres. The difference between the regional sports centre and the regular stadium is that the regional sports centre offers a wider variety of equipment and events. Together with Latvian Football Federation, we have created 41 mini-pitch, and also the stadiums are being built together with the Latvian Football Association. We have 63 sports. There are non-standard halls as well, arenas as well. We're very happy about the bikeways. Of course, the drivers might complain and may disagree that the development of the bikeway network hampers the traffic inside the city. I agree to that, but you know, we need to develop bikeways. There are 67 different bikeways connecting neighborhoods to the city center. During the winter season, we try to provide ice rinks and skiing circuits. Traditionally, we have a skiing circuit in the center of the city. Hopefully, in 4 years from now, we'll have our own downhill track in Symposium. And then there are also outdoors gymnastics fields, you know, where you can just engage in physical exercising. There are the waterfront is being used also, and other places are being used for sporting activities. Here you can see different locations on the map. I just wanted to add that according to different studies, Riga has the biggest density of population per 1 square meter of the sports infrastructure, and I totally agree with Zana. You know, I fully support the construction of another Olympic Center in Riga, or the second Olympic Center in Riga. So what are the activities that are promoted by the municipality in terms of supporting grassroots sports? Well, it does not require any studies or statistics to see that the demand for the parks, squares, stadiums is growing day in, day out. There are more people that are jogging or exercising in the streets, in the parks. That's why most of the municipal budget goes into the promotion of the grassroots sports. I mean, sports budget at the municipality. Free lessons, free exercises run by the municipalities together with different sports federations and sports organizations. Riga Marathon has become a solid tradition. The Rogaing and Rogaing is very important. And different other sporting events, you know, theme events have also become, orienting to theme events have become very popular, and school children are getting engaged in various. Last year we supported 169 competitions with 99,000 participants in 27 different sports disciplines. And then another very nice activity that we're very proud of and appreciated by the people is that, you know, whenever there's a city festival, there's not only cultural program, there's also the sports program on the embankment in Lutzovsal, in other places. There's a sports night, family sports festival, preschool, kids sports competitions, and so on and so forth. Of course, municipality alone will never be able to sort of implement or lift the sports policy without the support of federations, clubs and organizations. Let me just briefly explain to you, how we are supporting those various activities. Well, we organize different competitions or calls for proposals. Basically, that's the way we distribute the funding. So we have those calls for proposals at the end of last year, of the previous year, before when we are planning the next year's budget. After the approval, in fact, of the next year's budget, we organize a competition for various youth and other competitions, European, world competitions, competitions for the veteran seniors, for the people with special needs, and competition the best youth and sports organization, and this competition enables people to access the funding for the strengthening of their capacity. And a funny story, just recently this competition was closed and completed, and we had special funding for the university sports promotion programs. And there was only one applicant, University of Latvia. That sort of is a telling fact. Now, what concerns competitions or calls for proposals, there's call for proposals for the sports camps, and there's also the monetary prize for the best sportsman coming from Riga or living from Riga. You know, over the years, I've acquired the experience, which allows me to conclude that for the grassroots sports to be promoted, we need the funding, we need the infrastructure, but the most vital sort of driver is the motivation, the passion, the determination of the people, you know, to be active, and this motivation can be promoted or strengthened by strengthening family values, as well as, you know, growing role models that could then, you know, excite the people and inspire the people. Make people realize that, you know, by being active, I not only improve my health, but I'm also happier. Now, let's watch the video. So the aim of this project was to sort of activate or revitalize the neighborhoods by organizing, you know, 3 sports events. So the project targets different groups: children, adults, parents, youth, children, seniors. The organization Mummy Fit organizes the different events for the breastfeeding mothers and or generally for the mothers with children. This organization mostly sort of has its center of activities in Ziedlindars 3 times a week. So 11 different locations where 3 times a week you can join people exercising, and there's the webpage doing sports in Riga, where you can follow, you know, different information updates, where you can access the information on various exercise activities. And you can really see, you know, that the role models really matter. They can really make a difference, you know. Those people who are in charge of those activities, mostly charismatic people that can motivate and that can inspire the youngsters as well as seniors. And most of these activities are outside the stadiums, in various parks and squares, on the embankment, in major parks as well.
And I believe that this project will long-lived and serve our citizens in the long term. And now I have heard about this movement spreading also outside Riga in other cities. Thank you for your attention. Thank you for your presentation. Do you have something to add, or shall we turn to the Q&A session? Yes, dear colleagues, my name is Māris Liepiņš. I represent the Latvian Sports Federations Council. And I'm really happy that we have gathered today here, and we have great examples of the society becoming increasingly interested in various sports activities, and also our council has been an active participant in this process. And we have been also active partners at the European level. And these best practices actually prove that this movement has great potential. And not only the capital city, but also its surroundings and even more distant regions of Latvia become a part of these sporting activities. And whenever we discuss these best practices, we can see that this is a nationwide phenomenon. Do you have any questions? First of all, I would like to thank you all for your presentations. I think they were very interesting and really demonstrated how grassroots sports activities actually are becoming a part of our daily life in our communities. And also they emphasize the role of municipalities. And Riga is a great example. And in the area of football, we also enjoy support from various programs. Also, the Olympic Center is a great example of how sports organizations should work, because sometimes, of course, it's very difficult to balance various interests, and also in the light of scarce resources, and of course good governance is the key to the development of sports. And I would like to ask Mr. Severs about the sports infrastructure, because we as the Football Federation enjoy certain privileges, because so far we have been able to attract international funding, while also attracting more than 16 million from municipalities, which has allowed us to build several arenas. But other federations, of course, experience a shortage of funds. And also in football, we currently have more than 100 organizations which cover thousands of youngsters who engage in football. And there is a shortage of an estimated 60 football arenas. And in your presentation, you said that you are working on an infrastructure development strategy. And may I ask you whether you could actually tell us about the criteria based on which you determine priorities, and which types of sports will be included among the priorities in your strategy, and how you organize the whole process of determining these priorities, so that we may adopt our functioning if necessary. Yes, thank you for your question. What concerns sports infrastructure, I mentioned that in Riga and its surroundings, generally speaking, we have the necessary infrastructure. But of course, outside Riga, we have several major cities where this infrastructure is rather underdeveloped. But generally, in Latvia, the situation is quite acceptable. But somehow, people think that the state or the municipality has to ensure everything for sports. But of course, we are no longer living in Soviet times where the state provides and no other initiatives are permitted or expected. Already since early 1990s, basically sports infrastructure has been financed from the state budget with just a few examples of municipal funding. But after joining the European Union, the state investment was reduced because they relied on the European funds. However, it turned out that the European funds are not actually intended for sports infrastructure. And in a way, due to this, there was a shortage of investment. But the state has amended its legislation so that municipalities are allowed to take loans in order to develop sports infrastructure. And there are many projects that have been implemented in cooperation between the central government and municipalities by taking loans jointly. And what concerns our future plans, we want to have a balanced approach across the country. And which means that, of course, it's not realistic to build a sports center near every school. And what we are doing currently, and the plan that you mentioned that we are developing, is dedicated to the national significance, to the sports infrastructure of national significance, or the national scale. And also the relevant laws and regulations define the criteria based on which such national level sports projects will be implemented. But of course, no such project can be implemented without involvement of the relevant municipality. And we have already mapped the existing infrastructure and calculated the number of sports infrastructure per capita. But of course, we have to take into account the large proportion of people who are commuting on a daily basis. Therefore, of course, it's rather complicated to calculate precisely. And therefore, actually, this strategy tackles all these challenges in order to have a very clear view of what's the current situation and how to move forward. So, in a way, it's a mid-term financial framework for developing sports infrastructure. And it's not about a lottery where we simply at random choose a sports discipline which will be supported by means of implementing infrastructure projects. But I truly believe that you will support this strategy when you learn more about it and when government adopts it. And of course, we put a special emphasis on ensuring that each school has a gym so that all school children are able to engage in sports activities. And this means that public financing is earmarked for municipal level as well. Let me just add, since I was a mayor of a small municipality, of course, small cities have different requirements or demands in terms of sports infrastructure. And many municipalities now have these sports arenas built, but some of them have real problems with maintenance and actually running these arenas due to the demographic situation. Thankfully, in recent years, the situation improves. And of course, we have to keep a very close look at what is in high demand among local populations. And the investment should match the needs of local people. And also it has to take into account the seasonality of various types of sports. Another aspect is that smaller municipalities tend to build smaller swimming pools in order to cover also the youngest swimmers. And not always they have calculated the costs of maintenance and running them. And another area where we could improve our performance is the private-public partnership. And there have been many good examples of building multifunctional centers where sports facilities are housed under one roof with cultural facilities, etc. And if we don't have appropriate EU funds or national programs, we could work on various private-public partnerships. The same applies to football that you mentioned. Namely, we have a shortage of highly qualified football coaches who are prepared to work outside Riga in the regions. And Mr. Severs also mentioned that the first years of coaching or engagement in sports among children are crucial. And of course, this applies not only to football, but also to track and field and BMX. And those who have been active in sports in their youth, they usually also leave this heritage to their own children. And usually people who have been active in football, they are the ones who could be used as coaches for the younger generation. And this is one of the resources that should be used more widely. Because basically those who have played in their time football, they are rather willing to give their knowledge and to participate as coaches. Because believe me, it would be very difficult to attract professional football coaches to remote regions. And this is something that we should keep in mind when we think about human resources. Because, of course, one thing is infrastructure, but another is how to run these arenas, how to maintain them, and how to fill them with people and qualified personnel. Thank you. We are running out of time, so let us take just one question, and you will be able also to approach the panelists during the coffee break. Hello, my name is Agita Abel. I represent the University Sports Union. I'm very happy that you also mentioned the university students, although the panel is rather focused on school children, but I think that whenever we talk about university students and their activities, first I would like to thank Mr. Naglis, who emphasized that not always students engage in collective sports activities, and students also are not aware about the possibilities, or they don't actually have any physical activities at the university level. And unfortunately, for example, IT students have no possibilities for physical activity. The curricula doesn't include any type of such activities. But actually, these are the crucial years in forming of personality. And I think that we shouldn't miss this great opportunity to address university students. And now we are talking about introducing at least 3 physical activity classes in secondary school, but unfortunately we have forgotten about university students. And I truly hope that your plans regarding the Olympic Center will be able to accommodate also university students from Riga and also outside Riga. Because currently it seems like it is quite a problem among university students. And since many universities function as business projects, of course, it is quite costly to introduce some physical activity opportunities and to rent sports facilities. And of course, not all of universities are in a position to afford such activities. Thank you. So thank you very much. Now we take a coffee break and let us resume our work at 3 o'clock.